Hello, everyone. This is Jose Rivera, CSIA CEO. Thank you for attending the March CSIA webinar. Today's webinar will provide you with Instituting Best Practices, Two Integrators Perspectives by Charlie Sheets, PE, Director, Industrial Systems Division, Matrix Technologies, and Palmgren, PE, VP of Texas Operation, Patti Engineering. This webinar is part of our efforts at CSIA to promote and provide training around best practices. For 2016, we plan to broadcast monthly webinars on best practices. These webinars will be delivered by members whose companies have received our certification on multiple rounds, as is the case with Matrix Technologies and Patti Engineering, each with 5 certification rounds. In addition, we are providing for-fee supplemental training. Our Best Practices workshop will take place on Monday, April 18th and Tuesday, April 19th before the start of the 2016 Executive Conference in Puerto Rico. The cost is $1,500 for CSIA members and $2,000 for non-members. There are a few spaces open, so hurry as we're technically over the registration close date. For today's webinar, be sure to ask questions in the Q&A box, not the chat box. Questions will be answered during the webinar, so be sure to ask them. The webinar will be archived for later viewing, and the slides will be available also. The host and sponsor of our monthly business webinar is Software Toolbox, a CSIA partner member. Software Toolbox understands that you're not just buying software licenses, but are investing in relationship where you depend on your suppliers to be there every step of the way. Software Toolbox has also been around and seen the CSIA Best Practices grow to be the great tool that they are today. In Software Toolbox recommendations of best practices for its integrator partners is the best practice to think carefully before writing custom code and only do so when no other solution is available. Custom one-off applications are filled with risk and hidden costs when evaluated over the typical 10-year automation system lifecycle. Software Toolbox highly configurable, off-the-shelf software products and services are proven to lower system integration risk. This month, we are highlighting the Cogent Data Hub. Just like the human brain, Cogent Data Hub provides a multi-purpose nerve center, transforming process data into usable information. An intuitive interface connects multiple sources into accessible, secure formats. Thousands of installations have proven its bulletproof design. The adaptability of Cogent Data Hub never fails to impress. I would like to introduce today's webinar presenters. Charlie Sheets, he's a PE and Director of the Industrial Systems Division at Matrix Technology, a certified system integration CSIA member. He has been with Matrix since 1984 and is based out of Toledo, Ohio. Charlie has a BS in electrical engineering and an MBA, both from the University of Toledo. Steve Palmgren is also a PE and VP of Texas Operations at Patti Engineering. He holds a BS in electrical engineering from Kettering University. Steve has been with Patti Engineering since 2001. In 2015, he received the Rising Star Award by CSIA. So without further delay, here are Charlie and Steve.
Thank you, Jose. Steve and I will be presenting our thoughts on instituting best practices. We plan to touch on a variety of topics. Excuse me, I gotta go back one here. There we go. We plan on touching on these topics. We'll start first with some introductions about us, and then talk a little bit about the CSA best practices, what they are, what they aren't. Try to provide you some insight on how to begin using them. We'll also talk about the best practice audit process, what that's all about, and how your company can benefit from the CSIA best practices. We'll also touch on the costs involved, at least some benchmarks for you, and finish up with some areas you can get more information from, and then of course, at the end, we'll be happy to entertain some question and answers from you all out there. So My own background is, to tell you a little bit about our company, we were founded in 1980 as a consulting engineering firm. We started the system integration business in 1984. We are presently at about 300 employees. As far as CSIA certification is concerned, we were first certified in 2000, which I believe was pretty much the beginning of the process. And we are presently engaged in preparing for our 6th audit this year. We were recognized for 2016 Control Engineering System Integrator of the Year, which is actually the 3rd time we've received that honor. And personally, I've been at Matrix for 28 years, so I've seen a lot of this stuff develop. Steve?
Thanks, Charlie. Yeah, a little bit about Patti Engineering. We were founded in 1991, so a little bit younger than Matrix, and a little bit smaller. We're right around 45 employees spread across our different offices. We were first certified in 2003 and just completed our 5th audit in September of last year, in 2015. And we've also won the Control Engineering System Integrator of the Year in 2013. And we've got offices in 4 different states. Home is in Metro Detroit area, Auburn Hills, Michigan, and then also here in Austin, Texas, where I office. And we also have offices in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and in Kokomo, Indiana area. Myself, as Jose mentioned, I'm an electrical engineer from Kettering University in Flint, Michigan. Earned my professional engineering license in 2012 in the state of Texas. Also won the Rising Star Award in 2015 from the CSIA. And I've been at Patti for about 15 years.
So we thought we'd start out with what are the CSA Best Practices. The Best Practices cover the following areas, and they're really focused on prescribing the elements needed to have a successful business. These were developed and are maintained by the CSIA Best Practices Committee. They have been developed over many years. You might notice at the bottom there it's on the 4th revision at this point. I think a new revision comes out on the order of every 4 years or so, and as a matter of fact, there is one coming out here shortly, which will be the 5th revision, naturally. But back to something Steve said a few minutes ago, you know, this was developed by a group of integrators, and it continues to be supported by them. And I think that's really the key to it. It's not people that are outsiders. These are people that know and understand our business. One of the analogies I use to think about the best practices is that of a bookshelf. While that document explains what is needed, they don't provide the specific details of the policies and procedures. So if I think of it as a bookshelf, the shelves might be the different topics that are prescribed in the document, but the books that you're going to be developing are going to be your own procedures and templates, et cetera, to satisfy the requirements that are outlined. The CSIA does offer templates in the various library online with the website, and those are very useful if you're just getting started and need some examples. The company, or your company, would be audited against these elements to verify that your procedures and templates and project materials satisfy the requirements to gain the certification. But I really want to emphasize that the real benefit from following best practices is to help you run your business better. The certification is just sort of proof of that, and I think that's been borne out by many people that have been certified to best practices. I'd also like to just kind of let you know, we're not offering this presentation as a sermon. We've just been through this process a number of times, and especially if it's something you're contemplating, best practices is just as it says. It's a practice. We never stop learning and trying to do better, and we still do make mistakes.
I'm glad you mentioned mistakes, Charlie, because we certainly have made our share of mistakes as well over the years, and you know, this is just proof of why we need an outline like this. Can't be more true. And really like your shelf and book analogy, because that really keeps it open to allow your companies to you know, still keep your unique ways of doing things, yet still being able to follow a guideline that also fits your company at the same time. So it's a great mix of a framework as well as your own unique company culture.
So if you are interested in starting to use the best practices, we'd like to offer the following steps here. At least this is what's kind of worked for us. I guess the first thing is to read through the best practices document. It is a fairly lengthy document. I think it's somewhere around 100 pages or so. And if you're an experienced system integrator and never read this before, I can pretty much guarantee you some aha moments where you realize that if you would have done something, maybe as this document explained, things might have gone a little bit better on a past project. I think the next step is to sit down and really think about your own company's pain points. What causes you the most trouble on projects? Are they problems controlling scope, insufficient testing, bad contracts? You're going to find elements in the best practices that really address all these different areas. And again, due to the size and the scope of this document, it can be a little bit overwhelming. So my recommendation is, if you're just getting started on this, you know, just focus on one or two items and start there. This is a thing that really helps if you can engage other people in your organization, have them get familiar with the best practices, go through the details with them of what's called out for their particular area, and seek additional resources like templates and forums to support the areas that you've chosen to work on.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the comment earlier that I had made regarding the developed by integrators for integrators. You know, that's a very important component to the best practices. It's not lawyers, it's not you know, people that don't know our industry that wrote this document. It is people like Charlie, like myself, and all of you out there that have developed this. So it's very, very applicable to the control system world.
Well, once you've become familiar with the documents, depending on how close your organization operates to them, you may need to institute some changes. This is something, the more experience I get, the more I realize how much time it takes to really not only just, you know, understand what change you need to make and document it, but really to get people to use it and embrace it. And I find the larger the organization gets, the more time it takes to do this. But, you know, build a team, share the ownership of the process, and then, you know, build on successes. You'll see over time when these things help you to do something that maybe would have been difficult before, and those are the kind of successes you want to celebrate. The general rule of thumb I use is that minor changes might take 6 months to really get into use. Major changes, you know, brand new procedures or programs, they might really take a couple of years. But it's important to stay the course because they will be successful. But don't, you know, consider minor corrections if needed. The best input you're going to get on these things are from people that are actually using them. And if they tell you a procedure is too complicated or they don't understand the form, then you need to really take a serious look at that and decide if there's more training needed or if it's a revision that's needed. And the audit process will help you determine where you stand on these elements. You may be better than you think, or maybe not, but we've had very good experience with our auditors almost providing a consulting function. And I know Many of them do provide that service. In addition to the actual auditing, they're available for pre-audits and things like that, where they can sort of do a trial run and point out, you know, this area isn't ready to be audited yet, that type of thing.
I'm glad you mentioned the amount of time it takes, because I think that's a big question on people's minds. I will say for a smaller organization like Patti, you know, if it's you know, a lot of times we don't have procedures in place for items, just because we're more of a, you know, we just have never done it. And so what we found is when we've implemented some of the small things that we don't have a process or procedure in place, it's actually pretty quick to get things up and running. You know, maybe even a matter of a day, a couple of days, or a week. And then, but if it's something that's pretty ingrained in your organization, you've been doing it for a while, and you know you need to change it, those are the ones that definitely take a while. So I would definitely say, on a, you know, it definitely scales a little bit smaller in time or shorter in time for your smaller organizations, but it's probably a little bit lengthier, like Charlie talked about, for the larger organizations.
Let's talk a little bit about the best practice audit and what that's all about. First of all, the first step is to let the CSIA office know that your company is interested in pursuing registration. This will kick off a number of steps to help you prepare and participate in the audit. One of the things they'll do is give you some referrals for CSA auditors who can help you with this. They are independent firms. They are not integrators. They are auditing firms in general. And there's at least two that we're aware of, Exotech and American Systems Registrar. And both those firms are set up by CSA to provide these auditing services. As I mentioned, we're well into the preparation phase for our next audit. You know, begin your preparation early. Depending on how close you operate to the best practices, it can take 6 months to a year to be ready. You know, again, that wouldn't be full time, but what the auditor wants to see is evidence that you're actually doing the stuff that you say you're doing. The actual physical audit typically takes place over a 1 to 2 day period to go through all the elements. Of course, this depends on the size of your company and the degree of preparation. The results will be reviewed with you at the completion of the audit, and each area is scored in a range of 1 to 5 for each category. And those are kind of the elements of, you know, whether you pass or not, depending on some criteria like the size of your company, that type of thing. And once you pass the certification audit, your company will be certified for a period of 3 years. This allows you to use the CSIA certified service marks, and we'll also give you this nifty plaque as we show in our picture.
Well, one of the things I want to mention too, Charlie, to everybody is the audit component. You know, the items are called out in the best practices as far as which items are part of the audit. So when you're preparing, I mean, you kind of know what to expect. So you're going to want to have all your documents, your procedures, and everything ready for your auditors, and you'll know which ones they're going to be asking about. And depending on how ready you are for that, that could certainly expedite or slow down the audit process. I want to talk a little bit about you know, how you handle after the audit. We just completed our 5th audit and certification in September, and so now we're kind of on the backside of what Charlie's preparing for with Matrix, and we'll talk a little bit about what we're doing within Patti there. You know, one thing I want to make sure everyone understands, I don't want to be stressing the audit here. You know, this really is about the best practices. And the biggest reason Patti does the audits is purely for accountability. You know, it's a line in the sand, it's a date in the calendar. It's a way for us to hold ourselves accountable to make sure we are doing the best practices and making sure we're instituting that into our daily work. what we do is we've got a weekly meeting, and sometimes in that weekly meeting there's too much stuff going on within the company, and we don't get to addressing anything in our audit review. Sometimes we spend quite a bit of time, so we just kind of make sure it's in the agenda every week, and eventually we get through all the items. The first component, though, is to make sure you prioritize the results that Charlie was mentioning. You can prioritize all the items in the order that you think is best. That might be areas that you didn't score as well in that are more important to your company, or maybe it's by lowest score on the important items. But you definitely want to prioritize the list and attack the ones that are going to give your company the biggest bang for the buck. That's the most important component. The other thing I want to stress here too is best practices for small companies. A lot of times we'll get, it'll just be the upper management that kind of institutes it and makes it happen. I want to make sure everyone knows that it's important to share this with the entire team. Everybody throughout the entire organization needs to be a part of this process. Maybe makes sense to create a committee and assign somebody the head of that committee, and that committee has representation from all aspects, not just the operations team. It's important to include all components of the company in that, upper management, finance, HR, quality, everybody. So get everybody involved, and the more participation you have in it, the more it becomes culture within your company. And I think I mentioned before, the way that it's structured, it's set up as a framework. So it's very, very scalable for a company of 10 people all the way through a very large company. And it's all in how you institute it and how you bring it into your company and adapt it. It's just a guideline to help you be more efficient and be more productive. I think every time I read through the document, I find something else in there. Charlie mentioned the aha moment. I think there's always something else in there that I find like, oh yeah, we should be doing this. That's what makes the document so valuable. So I want to talk a little bit, and Charlie's got an example as well of more of a real-world application of how we've instituted best practices. And this has been a real big one for Patti Engineering. Prior to us getting real involved in the best practices, we didn't formally create what the VPs refer to as a functional requirement specification. At Patti, we just call it a functional specification. So we didn't really know what this was. So then reading through the document, we're like, I wonder if creating something more formal along the lines of this would help our business out. So we decided to try it out and to see how it goes. We started the process out on a project. It was ironically my very first project at Patti Engineering, and it was a very, very lengthy process. We found out that it was way, way, way more time consuming than we ever even imagined, and very, very much questioned whether it was even worth the time to do it. Because many times we know what the customer wants. We've talked to them, they've explained it to us, and we know what they want. And if we know that the customer doesn't know what they want, we're experts in this industry. We can tell them what they need. And putting that all down in writing was a very, very large task. And lots of flights back and forth between Michigan and California, but eventually we stuck with it and we finished it. We started seeing some results immediately that started raising our eyebrows. We were able to take that document and put it in front of our team of engineers to start actually developing the code. Once we had a signed off document from the customer, from our project leads, it was so much easier to communicate what the project was, what the customer wanted from the project, to our team without having to have them spend weeks and weeks and weeks getting up to speed on the project. So we noticed some valuable time saved just in the initial component of getting our team up to speed, as well as throughout the entire design process of having a common document that the whole team could refer to. Then we hit the home run when we got out on site with the customer. You know, the customer, we were out there, and you know, we've all been there, right? The customer comes up and says, oh, that looks great, but I'd really like a button to do this. And you kind of look at them and go, well, that wouldn't be that hard to do. But you stick to your guns and go, well, you know, that isn't really what we talked about in the functional spec. Well, normally that would lead to an argument or some sort of confrontational discussion with our customer. But in turn, it turned into a, well, yeah, we know that's an extra. We'll pay you for it. Just, you know, let us know how much it's going to cost. And our eyebrows went up and we're like, wait a minute, that's different than all of our previous conversations. So it really helped us define the scope of the project with the customer, and they knew where their line was in the sand as well. Very, very easy as far as transitioning into change orders on projects for scope changes and things like that. So that's probably one of the biggest ones for Patti in that arena. If you're interested and you have the document, that would refer to section 6.2 in the document, the best practices document, for more information there.
Thank you, Steve. That's certainly been our experience as well. Those requirements documents are so important. One of the things that Matrix has really benefited from in the best practices guide is around testing. There's actually two different areas that are called out in testing. Factory acceptance testing, which in our case is essentially before the software ships, and then the site acceptance testing once we're there. We've learned that the more we test our systems before shipping them, the smoother the startup goes. And the best practices also really emphasizes the importance of discussing site acceptance early in the project with the customer, so that both parties understand what constitutes acceptance. And then this is documented in that site acceptance test document, which makes it a lot easier to get that last payment and helps establish project closure. We see a wide variation in customers and in industries as to what's required with site acceptance, and that's it's actually one of the areas we had trouble understanding initially, where it talks about site acceptance. You know, some customers, for example, in a pharmaceutical industry, require full-scale validation, a fairly lengthy test document that relates back to the requirements, that has each element initialed and signed off on. You know, other clients are like, hey, if I can make production for 2 days, I'm good. You know, that constitutes acceptance for me. And of course, everything in between that range. So having that discussion early, though, is really important because, again, it makes the customer aware of what constitutes acceptance, and you know, they're good with that too. Just like Steve was saying, if they decide they want more coverage or more features, they're willing to say, yeah, I understand that's extra. You know, we'll cover that for you. And I have to say, you know, whenever we falter in these procedures, and yes, we still do have things that slip through the cracks, we learn the hard lesson again, but it keeps us going back to the best practices. And like Steve said, if you want to reference section 6.6 and 6.10 of the best practices version 4, you'll find a lot more information on that. This whole testing area actually moved us to hire a full-time software test manager back in 2014, and we continue to work in this area to improve our software quality and reduce errors.
Yeah, it's interesting, Charlie, that I think that we picked these two stories, you know, both mine and yours, because they're, you know, well, I guess it's not that interesting. We're both operations folks, but you know, the correlation between moving from a factory acceptance, or not, I'm sorry, moving to a factory acceptance test from a functional test, or a functional spec rather, you know, once you have that functional spec written, it's much easier to develop your FAT and your SAT afterwards. So it's a great way to transition and flow through the project as you develop and then install and start production. You know, one thing I want to mention to everybody again is it's interesting. You know, we both picked Chapter 6, you know, because that's really where Charlie and I focus within the companies. But I really want to drive home the message that there's way, way more to best practices than just operations. marketing, sales, HR, finance, quality, IT, and many, many more. There's tons of other areas within the best practices document that touch all aspects of the company, and they're all equally as valuable to your organization. So you definitely want to try to spread those areas and have those people within those areas of your company read those sections and try to adopt the components that are in those sections. So how can you benefit from or what do you benefit and how do you benefit from the best practices? I think we've kind of touched on this, but I want to summarize this. The biggest benefit is improving your company, becoming more efficient. There's a lot of external things. There's, icons you can put on your proposals and on your web page, but by and large, the biggest benefit you're going to get from doing this is running your company more efficiently. I think, like I mentioned earlier, every time I read through the document, I find something different that I missed the first time or the second time or the 10th time through the document. There's such a big wealth of information in there that you're never going to catch everything. So that's the cool thing about this document is since it's such a combination of so many different people, so many different heads, and so many different companies that have helped put it together, it really encompasses everything within the control system world. And then the big thing is why reinvent the wheel, right? Let's all benefit from the experience that we've all had growing in this industry. So rather than reinventing the wheel, let's benefit from it and raise the bar for the whole control system integration industry as a whole. That really is the goal here. And then we're also seeing quite a few vendors, and I've also had quite a few customers that really get the CSIA and understand what it's doing for the control system industry as a whole. And they're starting to recognize control system integrators that are certified, that are using the best practices within their daily business. And I know Schneider, Wonderware are a couple examples of that. And there's quite a few other ones out there as well that are starting to use it and are starting to recognize it and make that a high priority within their organization. They see the benefits of it for their business as well.
Thank you, Steve. So we did a little checking around as we were preparing for this WebEx just to see what types of costs were out there, and our esteemed colleague Jeff Miller from Interstates, shout out to Jeff if he's out there. He's done some coaching in this area, and this is what he kind of provided as his rules of thumb. He said you can really break down the companies sort of into two categories. Integrators that have a good set of documented standards that are pretty closely aligned with best practices, and of course those that don't. But he said for the people that pretty much have the standards, for their first time they could figure on about 6 months to prepare, which if you look at one or two people for a certain percentage of their time, could go up in the range of $20,000 to $25,000. The auditing fee is a portion of that, but a relatively small part of it. But Jeff added that money that they had saved doing that with better project delivery and better client satisfaction far outweighed those kind of costs. Integrators that are just getting started at building their processes, again, it might take a lot longer. It might take 1 to 2 years. If you figured 4 or 5 people working 10% of their time, these costs would range in the $40,000 to $60,000 range. These are certainly substantial numbers, but when they're done over time, and also when you start to see project delivery improvements and reduction in overruns, plus gains in repeat business, the changes can really pay their way. I always go back to kind of this last line here I have on this slide. What was the overrun on that last killer project that got away from you? I can tell you that we've had a few that definitely exceeded these kind of numbers, and you know, it can happen. So Jeff also said that he now figures he spends about $8,000 every 3 years getting ready for an audit, and every 4 years a new revision of best practices may come out. Takes a little more time to get ready, but just to give you a feel, that's the basic range of things.
Yeah, we're very thankful to have someone like Jeff involved in the best practices. You know, he's been involved pretty much since the beginning, and part of the committee within the CSIA that you know, helps do the revisions and all that. So we certainly appreciate his and everybody's on the committee's time that they put into it. Certainly very much appreciated within the industry. But yeah, the other thing too, I'll point out, you know, yes, you're going to be paying this kind of money, and it's spread over time, so that makes it easier. But you know, we mentioned earlier, you know, certainly for the smaller organizations, if it's things you're not doing at all right now and you can implement them pretty quickly, you can start seeing some of these returns pretty quickly as well. So it's not even that outlandish that it doesn't cost you hardly anything as you move through and spread this out over time and start implementing things over time as well, that you get those returns and then some right away.
Well, if Steve and I have done our job properly here, hopefully you have some interest in certification at this point. So we wanted to provide a couple of options for you to learn more about this topic. Our first shameless plug is just to repeat what Jose said in the beginning. The Best Practices Conference in April does include a Best Practices workshop. There still are a couple of slots left for Monday and Tuesday of April 18th and 19th. For that additional registration fee. Our second shameless plug is, if you can't do that, you know, we certainly encourage you to go to the conference. There are several sessions related to best practices, and it's just a great place to ask questions and talk to others who've been through the process. I'm actually old enough that I remember Charlie Bergman and some of the original vision of CSIA and his idea of the trade organization. And it's one of the things that's really neat about this group is the collaboration and the sharing of ideas. They really help, as Steve said earlier, they help to raise the bar for everybody and give us a better name as an industry for working to a high set of standards. The CSIA staff will also be happy to answer any questions for you or provide additional information if you're unable to attend the conference.
I'll also add in here too, Charlie, that both Charlie and I will also be at the conference as well. So, you know, he and I are obviously both more than willing to answer any questions and shake your hand in person if you've got any questions or and things that you'd like to address outside of this webinar. We will both be there, as well as many other resources at the conference.
Yes, that's absolutely true. Thank you, Steve. And I guess at this point, we'd like to open it up for some question and answer. We'll do our best to try to answer whatever questions might be out there from the crowd. Monica, you can help us facilitate that. We'll turn it over to you.
We have two people that did call in. Do you want me to go ahead and unmute if they have any questions?
Sure.
Okay.
Well, maybe while we're waiting to see a question come up, one thing we were talking about is, you know, what our experiences are in some other areas of the best practices besides just operations. One of the elements in the HR section, which is section 2.4, talks about training and development, and one of the big things there, we were always doing, training and thought we were doing a pretty good job of development, but the best practices actually calls out, establishing some metrics and record keeping around the training that's conducted and certifications, and that's something that we weren't really doing a good job of that. It was pretty much done on paper and keeping track of certificates and stuff. So we've actually implemented a training management system here at Matrix to help us track and report on that. Okay, got a couple of good questions here. The first one I see is, for the audit, can you do a partial audit, i.e. audit just one or two sections instead of the whole business process? Thanks for that question. I think the quick answer as far as certification goes is I think you have to satisfy all elements for the certification. What I do know is that there is differences in this based on the size of your company as to exactly the scoring that's involved in each area. The second thing I would offer is I know the registrars that we mentioned earlier, I know they offer some consulting services which again might be extremely valuable to do sort of a bite-sized audit, a partial audit, and gain some traction that way. Again, that wouldn't necessarily get you, that would not get you certified, but it would at least get you to the point of knowing that you're on that path and would still provide the business benefits. Do you have any comments on that, Steve?
Yeah, I think pretty much how I would have answered it as well. The fact of doing a pre-audit or something like that would probably be your best bet. Sit down with them and they can kind of go through, what areas look good, what areas don't, and help you focus in the sections that are really going to give you the biggest bang for your buck, as well as help you pass the audit as well.
The second question I see says, we are changing from ISO certification to CSIA certification. Do you have any advice on the biggest areas that will be new? CSIA appears to cover a lot more areas than ISO. So I guess one of the things there is we've actually been ISO 9001 registered since 1997. And we did that for similar reasons as CSIA certification, in that, again, it provides sort of that bookshelf for your procedures. We've actually elected to keep both certifications for the foreseeable future, and the reason we're doing that is different clients will require different certifications, and they're very much aligned with each other, at least in our experience in our business. I would say the CSA is certainly more focused on the control system integration, because ISO is for engineering, there's 3 different categories of ISO 9001 registration related to whether you're designing and building or just storing and warehousing and that type of thing. So I don't find them conflicting at all. I think CSA does get more into the business practices, but again, we've just elected to keep them both up, because once you have your policies and procedures, they can really apply to both areas. And essentially, to keep the ISO certification as well as the CSIA certification is a very small incremental cost. It's essentially just the cost to be audited every so often. So we actually keep both. So I hope that answers your question and doesn't confuse you further, but again, we could talk more offline.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have any experience with ISO certification. We've never gone down that route, purely just CSIA certification. We see the third question that came in here. How big should your company be, number of employees, before it tries to get certified? And I'm not sure for Charlie, I'll let him answer in a minute. We were probably about 20 employees in 2003 when we attained our first certification. I don't think that's because it's not like we waited for it. That was just the timing of the best practices as well. I'd say somewhere in that range, 10, 15, 20 would certainly be large enough to be able to get a lot of benefit from obtaining certification. Charlie?
Yeah, and I think that's a pretty good answer, Steve. You know, I guess I might look at it a little differently. Like we said before, you know, this is extremely scalable, I think, in terms of the processes. And if I was a very small company starting out, you know, in other words, just several people, I would probably just focus on the operational areas of the best practices and start to do my business that way. Again, I wouldn't necessarily be certified to it, but following the suggestions in there and using pre-configured templates to help you do your business well is very valuable, because one thing I do remember being pretty small when I first started at Matrix. We were only about 30 people, I think. You know, at that size, if you have a really bad project, that can almost be a going out of business type scenario in the nightmare of projects. So it's almost more important when you are small to have every project be successful. So to that extent, I would say, you know, it doesn't hurt you to start using them even if you're just starting out. As far as the actual certification process, I think what Steve said is, you know, 10 to 20 is probably a good range to get actually certified.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Business practices wise, or best practices wise, you could start using that with just one person. You know, just the factory acceptance tests and the you know, all of that, those sections you're going to be doing. You know, that's more of an operational thing, as Charlie mentioned. So yeah, you could be using those right away.
Okay. Are there any other questions?
I'll add one more thing here, and just in case there might be a couple more coming in. You know, if you notice, it's best practices and benchmarks. So I want to make sure you know, that component of it isn't lost in this webinar either. You know, that's one area that we found a lot of benefit in, is the benchmarking side of it. So it's not just how to do things correctly, but then it's how to measure yourself to know that you're executing it correctly. And in all areas, training and you know, pretty much every area has a benchmarking component to it as well. You know, that's something that we found a lot of value in just helping us not just say, yeah, we think we're doing a good job. It's we know we're doing a good job because we're measuring it. So that's a component I don't want to lose here.
So I see we do have one more question. It said, any recommendations on auditors? That's probably a pretty touchy subject, but I guess the most honest I can answer is that we've only had experience with Exotech, and they've done a very good job with us. To the best of my knowledge, I think ASR is fairly new, but I'm not even sure of that. Maybe Jose can chime in on that one. But I will tell you that ASR is doing the Best Practices seminar, so I'm actually looking forward to hearing them and meeting some of them to understand that. Steve, do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, my experiences have been the same. We've also only worked with Exotech on that, and primarily just because ASR is new to the game. So, you know, kind of in the same position you're at, Charlie.
So this is Jose Rivera. I'm chiming in because we're getting to the top of the hour, and I also want to address this last point about the auditors. We do have the two companies that were mentioned, ASR and Exotech, providing the audits for our members that decide to go for the certification round. Both have plenty of experience in the area, and we can recommend them. They have slightly different styles, and some of our members prefer one over the other. This ends up being a preference. And then what I will also say is ASR comes with a slightly different background. They come from the ISO 9000 world, so they provide that other additional benefit. And Exotech comes more from the industry perspective, former system integrator companies, and so they provide a little bit that perspective. But both are approved by CSIA, and they provide our audits. So because we're also reaching the top of the hour, I would like to do the closing. So I want to thank all the attendees for your participation, and my hope is that you have several takeaways. Charlie and Steve, thank you very much for the contribution of your time and expertise. Your presentation was very insightful. We wish the best for you and your companies, Matrix Technologies and Patti Engineering. Keep up the good work, and we look forward to having you for another webinar of this series. Thanks again to our host and sponsor, John Weber and Monica Anderson from Software Toolbox. Be sure to complete the survey for today's webinar. You will be directly tied automatically at the end of this webinar. It takes only 30 seconds to complete, but your feedback is necessary for our continuous improvements for the presenters and for CSIA. In closing, there are two thoughts. Best practices help you build a better system integration company, more resilient and better poised for growth. And two, maximize your investment in CSIA by adopting best practices. Hopefully, these webinars help you in your journey. This is Jose Rivera, CSIA CEO. Thanks again for attending, and goodbye.